Well, hello and good afternoon. Welcome and thanks for joining us in this episode of Insights Live from Space Store. Really excited for you to be joining us, whether you're joining us here in person in the new Space Store Design Centre in Clerkenwell, London, or whether you're joining us virtually, whether that's on LinkedIn Live, on Zoom, on the YouTube live stream, wherever you're joining from around the world. Welcome and thanks very much for taking some time out of your day to spend with us today. And we're focused on a particular topic today with our panel. The title of our conversation is around the greener landscape for work and designing for long-term sustainability. And I'm very excited to be joined by our panelists today. My name's Alex Harvey and I'm VP Sales here with Space Store, working with some of our global clients, developing furniture that suits their workplace and the workplace strategies that they have. But we're very excited to be joined by Claire, B, Ezio and Shane today. And perhaps we'll get each of them to introduce themselves, give us a bit of background around the role that they play, the organisation that they're with, and some of their background and development that's led us to this stage. So Beatrice, over to you first.
Hi, I'm Beatrice Gonzalez. I head the Workplace Interior Design team at Scott Brownrigg. My role within Scott Brownrigg is from the strategic direction of the interiors team to the day-to-day running of projects and overseeing every single project on a high level and making sure our team is as happy as they can be, basically. At Scott Brownrigg, we are architects and interior designers. We're based in London is our headquarters, but we've got offices across the globe, from New York to Singapore, Amsterdam, and a few locations in the UK. And we are a very well-established company over 110 years of
Wow, thanks for joining us and excited to have you with us today. Ezio, perhaps you can introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. My name is Ezio. As you can see, I've been working as the real estate manager for Northern Trust, investment bank, one of the oldest and biggest in America, and I'm managing the portfolio of Northern Trust in the region. So I'm working with the FM and the workplace team to define our strategy around innovation, where it will be, and the fit out of the buildings we have. That's the region.
Very good. Thanks, Ezio, and thanks, Steve, for joining us. Over to you, Claire. Would you introduce yourself?
Thanks. So I'm Claire Backus. I work for Barclays Bank. I head up something in the bank called the Design House, and that is trying to understand the future of work, how that's the enablers of the bank can create a seamless future thinking experience for our 80,000 colleagues around the globe. And that's, I suppose, trying to understand how space and the environment, technology and people behaviours start to interconnect, and how that ecosystem starts to exist to allow talent to shine, attraction to our workplace, results and performance of our teams, and to create equity and an inclusive workforce that we can thrive in, really. So that's what the Design House is to do. We mainly focus on piloting things. So we're looking for maybe things you wouldn't normally expect an investment bank that's 350 years old to be interested in terms of financial services. But we also recognise that talent is now flowing between investment bank to
Excuse me.
He was going to
It's like, okay. So we recognise that talent's kind of shifting from different sectors because skills are starting to harmonise in terms of technology, data, and insights that are driving that kind of experience. So it's really important that an investment bank can start to attract talent from lots of different arenas, and that's, I suppose, one of the driving forces of the Design House, right? A beacon to financial services.
Good, thanks, Claire. A beacon, I love it. Great expression. And Shane, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Shane, a concept advisor at Space Store. So my main role is working closely with the architect practices in the London area and working with their clients on creating workplaces. So look at the challenges they face and how we can help them with our products. And yeah, very excited to be on this discussion today. Some great panelists. Thank you.
Good. Well, thanks again, Shane, and thanks to all our panelists for joining us. So you only just joined. You're joining Insights Live episode 37 here in person in Clerkenwell in London. and excited to be discussing this conversation. So the title of our topic is The Greener Landscape for Work, Designing for Longer Term Sustainability. Now, we've had a lot of conversations, I suppose, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months around what does the future of work look like? A lot of clients who work with are figuring out their hybrid working strategies and what does that look like, whether that's a mandated, you have to be in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whether that's something that's more flexible depending on maybe team needs, individual needs, and the business and organizational needs. But what we really wanted to focus on today was how the impact of those things already happening, those hybrid working design strategies, can be overlaid with the sustainability goals that almost every organization we work with is now bringing to the fore, and how they can be overlaid and work together. So maybe the first question, just to kind of put out there and be interested in each of the panelists' view on this, is what does sustainable design mean for your organization? And then how are you able to impact that within your role, within the responsibilities that you hold? Maybe Claire, do you want to kick off with your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so if you look at the banking strategy for the Barclays, we are ambitious in terms of our targets within net zero. And the driving force of that is what we stand for and how we remain sustainable as a brand and as a successful organization. And that starts to reflect on our workplace and environment and the decisions that 80,000 employees make on a day-to-day basis. And I think when we think about long-term sustainable design, I kind of describe it as front of house and back of house. And what I mean by that is we're really interested in what the colleague experience is. And I think if you think about design of the future is becoming much more human-centric. Because you can design these amazing spaces, environments, interiors, but fundamentally the long-term sustainable design goes about how people react with them, how people behave around them. So we, I suppose, start from a place which is what's the kind of front of house human behavior that we would like to exhibit and drive, and how do we support that through the design of the environment, the space, and the services and experiences. And I think what it means to me is to put people at the front of it and to try and find ways in which we can build a sustainable narrative that people get excited about. And that in itself could potentially start to drive sustainable behaviours around the environment. And it could also, we think, if you think about the talent that's up and coming in now, they're more invested in what's happening in terms of climate change. Mm-hmm. And so, we have to be positioning ourselves in a workplace which represents their values. So I think if we can create an environment and design a space or location that is representative of our brand ambition of being net zero, and B, allows people to seamlessly have a much more low carbon lifestyle, then I think we're starting to move towards something which is much more longer term than I suppose the design phase of a building and the interior phase and the furniture we put into it. So that's the angle that I think we're coming from in terms of trying to think about the longer term sustainable shift.
Fantastic, good, fascinating, and looking really forward to kind of unpacking that and seeing how that fits with some of the other panelists. Maybe Ezio, you can give us your thoughts around what does that mean for you and what does that mean for your role and responsibilities you hold?
When you talk about not interest, you talk about the partner experience. So in not interest, every single employee is called partner. When you talk about the workplace experience, and other partner, being an employee, being a guest, being a client, and you put the human experience on the project. So we are moving towards a hybrid workplace. We're moving towards a more agile environment, but you have to connect the space that we have. You have to provide a good space where you will integrate or bring in your talent, like you mentioned. But you also have to think about the technology that is going to be applied there and all the other partners that are going to be involved in the process. So the contractors that you have there, so the suppliers that you have to be working on it. So you have to be driven the process of managing the building, managing the new transactions that you're going to come align with the landlords, for example, or what is those on the sustainability or to drive the properties that you have to having net zero carbon footprint, reducing the footprint, but at the same time keep it agile and able to grow and without having to increase our footprint on carbon or even be more sustainable. Yeah, it is a process that we've been doing by building, space by space, location by location, and in the opportunities that you have, bringing landlords, bringing the partners that you have, the contractors that you have to the table, and see that you can introduce a more simpler and fit out environment to the people using the facilities.
Very good. Thanks for sharing your thoughts there, Beatrice.
For us, so if you look at Scope Ramrick as an organization, so as architects, we have signed to a number of different things like the architectural declare we've made, the River 2030. So we've got very clear targets to where we want to be. And that also impacts in the processes that we do in-house. Not only how we target our projects, but also the operational running of our buildings. We're very lucky that we own 2 of our buildings. So how we manage those buildings, how we align to that goal of the 2030 is very, very important for us. So we have conducted a lot of analysis. We recently created a digital twin of our own building to monitor that operational carbon internally. In terms of the project, so we've got a lot of processes in place like any organization does. So every project that we have in the office, it goes through sustainability gateways. We've got 6 pillars that's for Ramrick in terms of sustainability and how we design. Our head of sustainability is present in all of those meetings to make sure that all of the projects align to that 2030 target. I think there is a lot of implementations that we have done recently in our projects. In interiors, we have started to do a reuse and repurpose schedule at the beginning of all our projects to make sure that when we approach a project from the beginning, the sustainability is part of the process of the design. It shouldn't be an add-on, it should be part of the design process. Within architectural, we look at all our buildings, whether they new builds or retrofit. We've got a retrofit exercise we do as a feasibility stage in all our projects. So even if the client comes to us and say, "No, I want a brand new building," if there is an existing building on that side, we make sure we go through that feasibility analysis to make sure that we tick all the boxes, that we look at whether there's an opportunity to retrofit rather than demolish the building and create a new one. So it's all about processes.
Very interesting. And it's fascinating to see how the different viewpoints that you're all coming from, how they overlay and I guess ultimately mesh together when we're starting to think about a project. And as we're kicking off, we'd love to invite questions from you, from our audience, whether you're online on one of the online platforms or whether you're physically in our showroom here. We'll make sure the questions get into the room and make sure that we bounce those around between our panelists. Really interested in what Claire and Ezio, what you both mentioned around this is about the human at the forefront and at the centre of this. And it's quite interesting to see the shift over the last 10 years from workers to humans to people, and the way that organisations are viewing, ultimately the needs and the values of the people that are within their organisation and shaping them. The organisations are shaping themselves so they can actually attract and retain the people that fit with their values. Be interested to see, Claire, from your viewpoint, how those two things kind of intermesh. The talent attraction you mentioned already, and then the sustainability goals or initiatives that you may have.
Yeah. So, isn't it spooky that we're here in 2023 and we're kind of waking up to the fact that it should be human-centered design versus studying buildings. And
it should be.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think, if you look at other sectors outside of workplace, they've all been fighting for the dollar, and the dollar's come from human. And I think there's something really interesting about the fact that we're sat in a world where we've got the lowest unemployment. You've got, the fight for talent, the war for talent is alive and well. And therefore, you're always looking for the kind of competitive edge. And I think, if you look at some of the data that flows around what talent seek. So, and that, I'm going to say it's tribal, less generational, because I think I'll be careful to start thinking demography. But that whole kind of ambition around climate is alive and well in people's mindsets, and that's been driven by probably their experience around other sectors and other industries, bar just work. So if I think about our approach to attracting talent, I'm thinking about the narrative we can drive to markets even. And you're getting to a point of where you can find your competitive advantage. And the competitive advantage when it comes to financial services is, I think, putting your money where your mouth is. So when I say that the bank's strategies around digitizing banking and moving to a carbon zero strategy and performance, and you can't do that and then get your talents to have a high carbon lifestyle, it just won't wash. So we're having to create, and it's exciting to see, we're having to create environments where you can put your money where your mouth is and show evidence what it looks like. But part of the talent attraction is, I think, about parts that you can play as the internal brands, the culture that you're driving. Because what we're witnessing, and a bit like you, we've done lots of work in terms of we understand, do we move, do we stay, do we retrofit, what are we thinking about the back of house, how do we heat a building, how do we cool a building, how do you do that, in a really sustainable way. We find our Glasgow campus, which launched 2 years ago, we did a major investment around that. In 2 years' time, that will be a building that houses 5,000 people that is carbon neutral. And what's interesting about that, you can do so much with the engineering, but actually what you're asking your 5,000 colleagues to do is to operate differently in some of their decisions, or to create the environment where they can bring their decisions around their sustainable life into work. But some of that, if you run buildings, is complex and difficult around getting your service providers to support their business. So what we're noticing, if you're trying to attract talent, is you've got to be really authentic about what it is you're trying to do. You've got to evidence what you're trying to do. You've got to build a narrative, and it should be people-centric around the narrative and the benefits that it brings. But then you've also got to work really closely with, yes, your design team, your construction team, in terms of your interiors team, in terms of what you build. But your service team have to be able to play out services in a way that contributes to some of your ambitions around sustainability. And those are the people that are interacting with your talent workforce to be able to try and nudge and preempt a seamless way in which people make right decisions. So our talent attraction is kind of focused around who we are, what we do, but how we do it. And that workplace proposition, I think, is becoming much more fundamental in terms of attracting key people to come into the workforce. So for me, it's about how can you create something that's easy? How can it feel the most natural thing to do? It can't be sustainable yet complex. And that itself is fun.
It's very interesting because when we get involved in projects and you ask the workforce what makes them come back to the office, the two main things is about collaboration, being with colleagues, and it's all about the experience. That is why people do that longer commute to come into the office, is the experience that they gain. And that experience is so easy to remember negative experiences, and it's very difficult to start pointing out during the day what the positive experiences have been. So I think the successful office is the one that the technology works without having to call IT. That is a seamless experience, and it's a memorable experience.
That will help not only attract talent, but retain talent, because it's not only about bringing them in, but keeping them there and keeping them happy. It's about the series experience. It's about coming to the building and have a space where they collaborate, they can knock themselves in the room and talk. It has to be less about the talk, but what is actually doing, what is activity, so what we do it, but you can prove that this is a green space, this is a sustainable space. So it's not a greenwash. You have to show by your actions, and I like your approach there. So it doesn't matter if I'm going to be doing a green building, and if the people work on it, doesn't understand the concept of sustainability, I don't bring this to their house, I don't bring this to the building, but the space you're bringing it. So it has to be organic, has to be integral, and has to be with the whole room has to be, content has to be, the open has to be the service providers that, so the grades and everything, they create the experience.
But it's interesting because I think about our graduate program. And we're bringing in grads to join the bank, and they kind of talk around. But they're quite demanding in terms of being very open about what single-use plastic, you know, how's my sandwich wrapped, etc. So there's almost a demand being driven by the workforce into how we perform in terms of environment, services, experiences, and you spot on. What we're from our data, what we're seeing is people want to come back to say they miss the office buzz. They want the buzz, they want banter, they want to be able to kind of connect and what that generates is the right energy for the right ideas for the work to flow. And some of that buzz happens around experiences which used to be carbon heavy, food waste, you know, single-use plastics, coffee, food, all of that stuff. So there's some really interesting key touch points in the day journey that you have to start thinking about those moments which keep the story alive. Because I mean, you know, talking about the interiors and the furniture and everything, but there's always people looking for, you know, how's the chair made? Where's this furniture come from? And people are much more interested in that than they ever used to be. And there's a real positive outlet to that with a commitment to kind of creating an environment that is moving towards that carbon position. There's so many stories that can be told in your workplace composition that potentially were never spoken about even 10 years ago. So I do think there's a shift in terms of why people join and paths that are really important.
You said that the new generations are most demanding, but they're quite vocal about, but people don't hear. So they can say, but if I don't translate that in action and do something, they're going to work for someone else.
Yes.
So that's why you have to they have to keep demanding, but you have to hear and you have to integrate it in the process.
I think it was interesting also going back to the data that we have gathered. And when we gather data, we do it from generations. So one of the questions is, what generation do you see? And what we see in the younger generations, two things that they're very, very vocal about is sustainability. They feel very, very strongly about sustainability. And also the learning and opportunities that they're going to have in the workplace. Is it going to be the right learning environment? Are they going to have mentorship? What's the career path going to look like? And those are the two bigger ones. So if you look at for let's say an exec or a manager is looking for, is probably they want the people back in the office in their seats because they still in that mentality of, if I see you, I know you're working. The younger generation, they're looking for different things. They're looking for flexibility, they're looking for learning, they're looking for sustainability. Those are the data and findings that we have been collecting for the last 2 years.
What we're finding is if we can offer data to the audience, it just drives them to make better decisions. So this whole idea of, you know, how do I carbon count my commute? How do I really think about, you know, the impact I make when being in a building? So I think the other interesting thing about long-term sustainable design is how do you kind of interlink the building, the experience, and then the technology to allow kind of self-management and self-opportunity to solve some of the bigger sustainable decisions that people make. And there's things like we've always heard the story about turn your monitor off and don't leave it on standby. Technology should be able to kind of understand your working behaviours and therefore start to predict and start to do some of that for you. But for you to be able to kind of have a view about what that looks like and the decisions you make, it's a bit like, how do I get my Apple Watch to manage my health? And that's, I think, some of the things that we're looking into in terms of how do we help people make better decisions that they can do something.
When you talk about new building, you might talk about fit outs, and you talk about new projects, you put the technology, put the people, but sustainability, all the same. They're the main part of the process. So the experience has to be seamless, but you have to be focused on. It's on the beginning of this. You talk about, can you retrofit, can you reduce what you have there? Can you reduce the cost of the fit out based on using some of the material that you have in there? So, and talking about, again, like experience, that's going to be using and how that's going to be impacted. The carbon that we're going to be bringing into the building.
So it feels like you need the sustainability story and almost the drive for sustainability. It needs, instead of it being a sustainability team over here in the corner of the organisation, it needs to somehow be spread throughout the whole organisation so that
Part of the conversations in the beginning of the process is how it's in the tender. So how is your company managing? So how you're tackling the you this road. So you measure that, you put targets, you put KPIs to understand that out of the department that you are bringing in to work with us, understand those importance and this is value place.
And I'm sure then that has to weave, as you occupy the space, then has to weave its way through all the different teams that use that space. And thinking what you're saying earlier about the catering and everything else, this can't just be a sustainability team doing their thing over here. It has to be spread throughout.
I think if you consider what success looks like for an organisation, and if you look probably the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, this is about how does sustainable outcomes almost trump profitability, because you can make as much money as you want, but fundamentally if you're not building to solving problems or helping planets, quite frankly you don't have a future. And therefore, I think every C-suite has got sustainability and climate action right at the top of their list, no matter what they are. And if they're not doing it, legislation will drive it. So fundamentally, the metric sustainability probably becomes number one point, which again used to be a nice to have or a should do, but now it's a must do.
Some must do. Regulation is coming and we have laws changing every day, being introduced every day. So now when you talk about the perspective of my position, when you're looking for a new location or looking for a new building, I'm going to look for all the certification of the building has all the sustainable actions that are able to take into account. I'm not going to go for a building that is not certified.
It's quite scary when you think that in 2030 they say 80% of the buildings that 2030 they're going to be 80%. So when you as an organisation, you look at a new building, that's the portfolio that you have available. And there's not that long to go. It's only 7 years.
But
That's how much we can do in 7 years.
But then you're gonna have to go back to the older building that has been sitting there in over months and it's still there. So what are you gonna do? When you talk about sustainability and economy, you still have to go back to make some decisions about how to bring it down to the 20. Yeah, exactly. So that's the trick. So we've been doing that, talking to the landlords. You have the opportunity, you have data that you can data now, critical data you can work with. Bringing it to the conversations. Let's see.
That's really interesting. A lot of our projects in architecture, which say 70% of the project that we're doing at the moment is retrofit.
That's really too
Rather than new builds. We've got a few new builds, but there is a massive drive in the city of London on this. How do we bring the buildings that we currently have to the standard to compete against those new builds that they have the certifications in place?
And this standard is going to change because in 2024, 2025, they're going to have to be certified. Otherwise, it's not been rented. Oh, it's going to be rented or brand new. They're going to cost more. No, and I think it's right. It's driving that way. They're going to force again with some companies that go together and plan. So how to head up with those buildings, how to make it sustainable, and how we as a company can use them for help in the process.
looking at some of the questions that are coming online, and I'm interested in your view on this question. So the attendees asking, what do you think about the sustainability accreditations that can be achieved over against a holistic long-term view of sustainability? It's almost though it's either one or the other. What would you say, Beatrice, from your viewpoint?
That's really interesting because for us, when we do a project, we always ask the question to the client: do you want these projects to be LEED green certified? And the complexity and the cost to go through that accreditation is enormous. Some organizations, they use it as a tool to attract and retain talent, because it's another nice thing to have. But actually, I think as an industry, we shouldn't be just focusing on accreditations. It should be embedded as part of what we do. I think the accreditations are there to provide guidance and to provide milestones of what the team should do. And by a team, I mean the client team, I mean the consultants and the suppliers in terms of what we should be doing. I don't think every project should be aligning to accreditations.
I still also think that we cannot only rely on the accreditation. I cannot just go to a building expecting I have other accreditation coming from the landlord perspective. Me, once I'm in there using the building, I have to make it work together. So I have to bring a certification to be working with how a space is used and use it in a sustainable way. Like you have in your London or in your office. So you get on the rooftop of the building, you're trying to put up the hives on it. So you go back to the building that you've got in Basel. So the whole building is heated by actual of water panels on the building. So it's always going to be a green building anyway. So that aspect. So you're trying to look for that and how I'm going to be integrating that certification is my way of finding it.
So accreditation is really interesting and odd, but just go with it. It's a bit like Michelin ratings for restaurants. Yes. Just go with it.
It's spelled.
I mean, all I mean is okay. It can be a Michelin star 3-star. Okay, it's probably not the best experience. It might be the best food, but it's tablecloth, it's dinners, and so the accreditation essentially is not fit for purpose for every day or for everybody. Okay, because the world changes, needs change, technology moves us, etc. So I really like what you said about it needs to be embedded in everything we do. So I suppose it's this link between recognition of what the accreditation is trying to do in terms of how it influences the whole real estate market in the play. Speed at which we're learning and accelerating around sustainable opportunities, sustainable processes, new products, etc. And trying to kind of create the embedding desire to drive climate movements. And they're all not going to work in a parallel way. And so you're going to always get this moment where it's just going to be out of kilter and out of sync. I think the interesting thing where it feels like it would be great to have more energy around is that whole life cycle of, we've talked a little bit about it in terms of your intention around design. So you said you start off with a number of processes. And the first thing you're kind of saying is, well, do we need to build it? Or is it reused? Or is it refused to build? What is it? That whole intention about what we're trying to drive, all the way through to the design and the integrity of design. And that's not building design, the interiors design only, that's also service design. You're thinking about complete customer centricity, how you operate that building and how people pass the flow. And then, you know, the management of that building through to inhabitants and behaviours that they drive. If you aggregate that data set, all of a sudden you probably have much more power in terms of making a much larger shift in the ecosystem of sustainable design versus how I design something, how I construct something, how I deliver something, how I run something. So I'm really interested in how that relationship between the life cycle of a building or an interior starts to exist with data that flows horizontally versus how I build it or how I design it, how I build it. And then
silos don't talk to each other.
Yeah, and I think that's then driving a bit more of a movement to, you know, I mean, we're in your beautiful showroom today. Let's say that.
Thank you. We are absolutely. Yeah.
It is stunning, by the way. But you know, this whole thing about circular economy, and we had a brief chat earlier about it's fascinating that if you think about furniture, for example, and you just have to look around, there's some real entrepreneurial spirit happening in this market, and they're kind of small startups, people coming up with wild, wacky ideas that sound really difficult to scale, but there's something about how we kind of leverage this really cutting edge kind of view of how people are using materials and thinking about materials for sustainable life cycle, how we try and make them scalable. So I'm also really interested in that data piece. And I'm sorry, I moved away a little bit from certification, but I suppose that kind of shows that certification feels quite staid. If you think about the speed of how things are going, if we could create that entrepreneurial kind of edge and bring in partnerships and try and drive the ecosystem, does that help us get to a much more longer term sustainable position versus us leading to a regulation or, you know, pivoting a way that we financially kind of think about our buildings and occupancy and landlord positions and developers? I don't know, but I think there's something about how to glue those silos together to create much more of an aggregated way.
Thing is designing for longevity. If you look at what's the answer of the future of design, looking at that circular economy feels the right way of doing it. And you know, when you design interiors, they've got a shorter life span. The buildings, so when we design interiors, we design it for 5 or 10 years, depending on that building or depending on the organization. It's not, we shouldn't be designing for that 5 to 10 years. We should be designing for what's happening in the future after that. And you're going to, as a supplier, you would take back some of those products. What's going to happen to that in 5 to 10 years? So designing for longevity, looking at the reuse, the repurpose, you know, there is a movement in our industry about looking at buildings as material libraries of, you know, what's happening with from ceilings to raised access floors to walls to furniture, you know, where is that going to go at the end of that life if that fits out? And I think it would be interesting also to hear from the point of view on that longevity, and when you do projects, what do you expect to do with those fit outs after 10 years, or when certain elements have no beautiful purpose anymore?
Well, I suppose the simple answer is money talks. So as a bank, we're going to stretch the limit of that investment as far as we can. But I think, you know, it goes back to also the narrative. So user experience and people talking about their environment and building and the part that they play in it. So you talked about reuse and repurpose, and what we saw through COVID times, I used to see, but what we saw through COVID times was kind of like offices were completely empty, not doing anything, and everyone was at home. And it's, you know, crazy things like repurposing furniture for people in different locations. And I think it's a mindset about how we think about life cycle and user experience in terms of some of these fit outs that we do. And I suppose what we're just on the cusp of is we are currently retrofitting a number of our buildings and trying to move into a carbon neutral kind of environment. We're trying to understand what does that look like over 5 to 10 years, because technology, and especially if we think about the environmental systems in buildings, are moving at such a rate of knots, okay, and what feels like the right decision now, in 5 to 10 years, should be completely off point, you know, and outdated and not doing the job. But I suppose the key thing is, it goes back to this point around certification. There is a point in time that you're kind of regulated to. The world is moving as quickly as it is, and we're only finding out new initiatives, new technologies. Then we have to be open to understand how we calculate life cycle costs and how they are measured over a period of time. But that, I think that's a really heavy lift, the way that you think about your investments around assets. And I think only in time we start to understand how that starts to play out.
Probably going to have to evaluate the KPIs. We keep changing, the market keep changing, we're just going to have to adjust those certifications against the new technologies and make sure that the KPIs have adjusted.
Just the point you're making, I think it's kind of picked up a few times. It feels to me as though, by its nature, good design has to be sustainable, because it's designed to cater for the future, because it's designed to cater for, you know, the flex that we may see coming or we may not see coming. But also, I'm guessing since COVID, we're seeing a lot of clients have reduced their real estate footprint. And one of the key elements, you know, we talk about recycle, repurpose, but reduce is another important part of sustainable design?
If it's not sustainable, it's not a good design. So that's the point of view, that's my I started
Yeah.
from, so a good design has to be sustainable, has to be use the elements what you have, has to apply on the capture fix. So we just showed you that amazing divider there that's made of
Yeah.
yes, that's made of salmon. So it's all about how I'm gonna get purpose in my building, how I'm gonna be careful things. So I'm gonna use something that in 10 years time, it just composes. So that's what you have to know. That's the view that you have to be bringing on. So when doing a room like this, I want to have equipment or material on there that's not gonna go to the left.
We just done a prototype project for a commercial train station. It's who they are. But one of the strategies behind that project, it was looking at the sustainability and designing long term. So first of all, the prototype was about how do we bring hybrid working into that organization. So it was a floor that was designed by 80% collaboration, 20% spaces or desks. And within the design also, it was very important to look at flexibility and adaptability and what happened to the products and the materials that we specified in that project. So looking at furniture solutions that you can take away with you. So if the client were to move to a different location in 5 years' time, maybe we use repurpose and reconfigure in a different manner somewhere else. And that goes not just for the furniture, but the rest of the materials that we were implemented, from magnetic timber floors to acoustic panelings that they can be removed, from ceilings to lighting. Everything was designed to be taken apart and then be installed somewhere else in a different location. And we were lucky enough that some of the elements of that project that were distributed to other locations within that organization and other offices. Also, that organization they benefit from reuse and repurpose a lot of furniture that they had in different offices in the UK and were able to connect that.
Feels like though, a different view about how you cost. Because one could argue that specifying all those things sound more expensive than specifying an office fit out fit for a financial institution. So of course, I suppose the cost modelling of what this means is a different picture to potentially what your CFO would be looking at 10 years ago. So there's something about actually how this is presented as a win, because yes, you've got your sustainable ambitions, what that means and how that translates. But financially, what does that mean to your business? And there's the kind of direct and indirect about cost of the project over a period of time. Does that increase through sustainable outcomes so that you increase that, you capitalize that over a long period of time? But the indirect things are about those much more difficult things to measure, but much more powerful to the brand, around the story that you can tell about your office, the purpose of your office and how it's designed. How people enact and interact around those elements. In fact, that story grows because we said part of it gets repurposed. So I think there's something for us to bring to life when you think about long-term sustainable design, about the financial aspects that business still kind of feel very close to, and how that model needs to be presented, because it's different. It's different because one could say that the upfront cost is larger than if you did not drive a sustainable design.
Just on that, I'm curious to know if it was.
In fairness, it wasn't, and that is where I'm trying to get to. I think there is this perception in our industry that sustainable design has to be more expensive. It doesn't, and I think the beauty is, if we were to look at where we were as an industry pre-pandemic and how the pandemic has accelerated the demand for products and the demand for products or suppliers, then the cost has come down. And also we look at repurpose and alternatives related to furniture, there is part of the previous retail that was there. That also is a cost saving. You don't have to re-specify pencil ceiling tiles or raised access floor because it's already there. If you have furniture in stock, you can repurpose it too. there are other elements that are more expensive, but actually equals very similar.
The balance out. And probably doing what you mentioned, extending the life of the product, capitalizing the period. So if cash flow is going to be more, but it's gonna affect the P&L, it's gonna be over a long period. So become financial, a little bit more attractive, but about goodwill, the brand, how this is going to be sold, how this is going to be reflected outside. So how you're going to be using that as to benchmark and to position yourself. As good value.
We've definitely seen that with, like, for example, Apple with their design, one of their key things for their sustainable design is that they use furniture pieces that are timeless, so they're not going to date, and they're excellent quality, so they're not, functionally, and they're still going to be working, they're not going to fall to pieces in 5 or 10 years' time. They can actually stretch out the life of their workspace, and that for them is a key driver to their sustainable design. It's not so much about some of the other tick boxes, like you say, the certification, that kind of thing. It's about practical application of let's make this workspace last as long as possible, functionally, and aesthetics and design.
But it's the interiors drop in the ocean when we think about sustainable building, where actually when you think about energy is consumed, and if you kind of aggregate that across design building, it's like just for retrofit, but actually retrofitting a building to bring it up to a certification can be heavily costly, can be quite costly. So I get the interiors piece, absolutely, but it feels that there's a bigger game to play in terms of carbon of a building or environment and how people behave. Discuss.
So, yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the MEP systems,
Yeah.
the impact that building has over, what was it, 50 years.
It's the process, because the people never measure at the beginning, everything integrated to the life cycle of the project.
I think that's the thing about, if you can aggregate that data, then actually where you spend your money becomes much more powerful way to break the sustainable outcome.
Let's bring it
But
all
the
this
technology is there for us to do that and to do the job. So I mentioned before that it would not change. So it's something that is going to be a game changer for a lot of organizations, that they're going to be able to look at the data, how you currently use the building, and also implementing artificial intelligence to then foresee what's going to happen in the future, and see how your you can utilize your existing assets better, how people use their space, how that you merge that experience with the operational aspect. I think in a few years it's going to transform how we see our buildings.
I suppose the other key thing is, do you need a building? I mean, I think that's really interesting about linking the future of work with sustainable design. And if you think about real estate and how it's currently utilised in terms of workplace, and then you think of essentially if it was completely borderless, how might you think about the place in a long-term sustainable way and link that to actually how people will choose to operate? And I think there's something interesting about transformative shifting around sustainable design, because that then is turning around and asking the question about why. Why do we need building? What does that translate? What does success look like for that?
Why or how? So I do believe in the building. The question is, how much do you need to say? How much space do you need? How much you're going to use that building, and how it's going to be used?
So I think the how comes after the why, because why you need the building is, and then all of a sudden you start to discover that's why we need the building. How might we operate? And actually, that might create a completely different relationship in terms of occupier, landlord, tenants. And before you know it, that ecosystem, we talked about the circular economy and how we give them room to breathe and become scalable. All of a sudden, your kind of partnerships of how you're interconnecting start to become a bit more exciting around shared space, smart cities, and kind of that whole piece. So,
But then,
And a flexing headcount as well. I'm assuming day-to-day we talk.
but then I have a question. So you mentioned for the beginning, that's what you asked about, do we need the building, and how you use the building? But you talk about the retention and how you have the impact on the life of the people working in the building. If they are fostering and incentivize them to be green, how are you going to have those sustainable? How are you going to have that control if you're not going to have one building, but hundreds of buildings with everybody in their own house and you have no idea how they are taking sustainability. Because you said that why do we need a build? A build is gonna be there. I'd be my only.
So I suppose the key thing I'm trying to say is, if we wanted to make absolute fundamental shift, if we look at our real estate currently and the utilization of it, how you've got this balance between the purpose of what we're building, creating the experience so people feel connected to something, the workplace, and you then create this opportunity for them to have the best carbon lifestyle when with you. And hopefully you're nudging behaviours, you're predicting them with data. So when they go home, they're talking to their kids, wives, husbands, children, and they're, creating a sustainable lifestyle, which people are demanding, with freedom now. I suppose what I'm trying to say is the model that we have about everybody has their own buildings on Friday night, the rates on, we quiet, we off it, by the time we turn the lights on, lights down, it's time to set it up again. There's something about that for me around sharing economy.
Definitely, yeah. It's what happened to those buildings on the Friday, 6 p.m. until Monday night.
So that long-term sustainable design goes from, I think what we're saying is it's touching everything. But there's play, there's opportunity in terms of us taking down some of the more traditional ways in which we have ownership. And so you talk about kind of flex offices, but the relationship between occupier, tenants, landlords, kind of developer, community. There's something in that if you're talking truly about long-term sustainable design, which is a bit more than just the tacit, the tactile things that are around us, which are highly important, but fundamental kind of principles at the base. If you think we've gone from experience economy to a belonging economy and now to a sharing economy, what does that mean for us and what does that mean for future of work?
I think it's very, very interesting. And part of the sustainability is the social value. How do you, that's why I mentioned the communities, like what do you as an organization, as your asset to that building, what do you provide to that community to run the building? And I think there's some examples already in place of organizations where there are a level of public spaces versus private spaces and how those spaces are occupied during the non-working hours, and trying to work that building hard at, because like you say, you don't switch off your lights and the building switch off. It doesn't do that. You need to keep maintaining that building from 6 p.m. on a Friday to 9 a.m. on a Monday. So how do you use that? Did you allow students to come and use that space of the weekend? Do you allow members of the public, the community, to have access to those spaces? I think the challenge is, with organizations like Barclays, for example, there is an element of privacy and security, and where those barriers blur, and how much of that space is shared, and how much of those spaces can be shared.
That's the exact question in my mind. Have IT joined this conversation?
I'll give you an example of that, because I think there's parts of what Barclays is doing and really push the boundary, because you're right, we are a highly regulated organisation. I take Glasgow, our campus in Glasgow, and we started this journey of kind of campus life in Whitney, New York, and the whole the concept of campus life was, how do we create an opportunity for different teams to come together, for the brightest minds to shine, to have some of the best ideas to implement. In Glasgow, where we basically gone south of the Clyde, so we're out of the city, for the best views, by the way, to look back. But what's really interesting about it, about 85% of our ground floor is open to the public. So we made an absolute conscious decision around creating the Be Your Best Neighbour, social opportunity, driving a force for good. Now, why did we do that? We have talent we want to attract, so we're trying to increase our workforce in Glasgow. We recognise that we want to be the best neighbours, how do we play a part in the city of Glasgow, etc. But the other part of it is the talent that we have, the potential piece is, actually, how do you create place? How do you create a sense of place and somewhere where there's a magnet to be drawn to? So, that ground floor is now where we've opened to the public, has opportunity for social enterprises, coffee roasters, bike shops, what's that? Benefits to Polly above, behind the secure line, benefits to neighbourhood because we see as a regeneration. So I think that's sustainable piece that we're talking about is so far extended from the things you see, touch and do. It's much more a sense of who you are and how you kind of enable that and create that sense of purpose. So I think it's vital that we're thinking more holistically around some of that sustainable design versus just power.
And after the fact that it's after 6 o'clock, the space is too used. So you don't have an empty space, you don't have an empty mentor some for your clients. So probably if you walk along there on a Friday on a weekend, it's deserted. So what to do with all that
We
space?
are tourists.
You can go back towards the city, it's going to be not
Yeah,
that
it's
full.
very, yeah.
Yeah. So you have to think about how to bring life to that space, how to bring the community.
I like the idea of creating a place.
Explain.
Placemaking is very, very important. In those spaces, we create placemaking, then during the weekend would be full of purpose, right? That's empty. Huge reflection on the brand.
Very conscious of time. We're down to our last 2 minutes. The hour has flown by. So thanks again very much to our panelists. Any final thoughts just as we wrap up? Beatrice, any kind of reflections on the conversation we've had so far?
I think it's really interesting. I think things that I take away with me is creating that holistic approach, looking at the experience, the place, so to people, place, and culture. Those are the 3 pillars that I think everyone should be considering, and then how sustainability touch each of those pillars.
Very good. Ezio, any final thoughts?
Make sustainability part of the conversation and talk about occupation beyond what you used to. So you have to open your minds, like this is doing in the hospital, and create community around what you do. So instead of people's more important to us, but people go beyond the time that I'm building or what you're going to be using that space and make everything around them. Extending the life cycle, extending the usage, extending the space that we have. I really like what you're talking about, what we're doing.
Very good. And Claire, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts, human centered, but I think this will only move forward with some of this through data. I think ecosystem data, being able to glue those parts together across the whole food chain, as it were, will be a real power play for us to understand the impact it can have, all the decisions you need to make. And I think the more that technology plays its part, digital twinning, AI, all of those key things, to be able to predict what we can do, I think it's got this power.
Very good, yeah, and certainly that's come through very clearly to me that the human, the person at the centre of all of this is so important. And I think challenging the accepted norms, the way that we've always done things isn't necessarily the best way or the only way, or perhaps the way we should be doing things in the future. And that will present, big challenges. But it'll also present the opportunity for great ideas, for outside the box thinking, as you say, for the brightest minds to shine and work together and bring solutions. So very good. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thanks for joining us online and in the showroom. We've been with Space Store. Thanks and have a great rest of your day.